I did get chills. I do have a moment of sadness here for him, and yet at the same time, a lot of excitement for our country and the path ahead. This was an incredibly difficult decision. I'm sure all of you can just imagine that somebody who worked his whole lifetime to attain the presidency had an incredibly successful 3.5 years. And yet, over the last few months, he struggled. And we all saw that live during the debate. And so I and many others, some more quietly, some more publicly, came out and said he should pass the torch. I'm glad he did. I'm glad he did it today. That gives us time. We have 30 days to the convention when these delegates will vote. Now, I understand he's said he's endorsing Kamala and the vice president to be the next president. And I appreciate his loyalty to her, and I appreciate the fact that this is not unexpected. That being said, very quickly, the Washington Post came out and recommended an open process. I believe that that's in the best interest of our party and the country at this time. That would include Kamala and have her compete as well with others to determine who is the best person to lead our party going forward. But it's a short period of time now. And so we're going to see how this evolves over the next few days. I believe that a week from today we'll have clarified at least that part of it. And let's see if other people want to join in this competition to be the nominee of the Democratic Party. Or will they all just back away and let her take the lead? But there are a lot of people, as you're putting up on the screen now.
Yeah.
I personally know most of those folks. And I think any one of them would be phenomenal and would be a tough competitor for Donald Trump.
Ambassador, explain to Canadians watching why, in your view, the open competition is something you prefer over kind of anointing Vice President Harris as the nominee.
So I think the American people would like to see some type of process and would like to see somebody evolve and rise up during this incredibly short period of time to represent them. And why would they like that? Well, we've spent the last 3.5 years supporting Joe Biden, and we've all been very much there. But Kamala Harris was selected by the president to be the vice president. And so it was really his selection. She really didn't even compete in the 2020 presidential race. She started off, raising money and was a competitor, but she never really even got to her first caucus primary. And so this was as a result of a deal done between Congressman Clyburn and others with the president, and which allowed him to gain the seat that he has, the presidency. And I think people would prefer not to have someone just anointed to be the next nominee. They'd like to see some type of process. Look, she's in the lead, and it very well may be that she is the one who's selected next month here in Chicago to be the nominee of the Democratic Party. But for the people that I talk to, former ambassadors, friends, donors, etc. I think they would like to see this open up a little bit, have a real competition. We have an incredible bench, as you've shown many Canadians in some of the slides of many of the people who could potentially, compete for this slot. And many of them governors, and they're all here. And so
right.
I'm very much supportive of a more open process, but whoever the nominee is, I will be supporting.
Is there someone, Ambassador, right now that at this juncture, and granted, of course, this is all very fresh, but you did make that public statement. Is there someone that you would be supportive at this point of?
I think it's a little early, but I do know most of those people on a personal basis. And I believe any one of them would be fantastic. But let's let the process evolve a little bit over the next week or two or three. And it may very well be, as I watch and we all watch, that I'll endorse one of those candidates. But I was just recently on a call with Governor Whitmer. I've known the Bashir family in Kentucky. I know former Mayor Pete, Secretary Pete. I traveled, as many Canadians know, just a few weeks ago with Governor Pritzker to Toronto and Montreal. And I actually wrote a check when she first announced Kamala Harris for her presidential run. So I am close enough to all of these folks. The only one I haven't met personally was Gavin Newsom, governor of California, but we've been even in touch with his office to try to set something up. So look, they're all good and they're all going to be fantastic. And you know what's important about this is we've used the term passing the torch. They're all a different generation than what Donald Trump and Joe Biden represent. Both of those two represent somebody who was born in the 1940s. And so here we have a lot of people who are much, much younger.
Ambassador, you mentioned, we touched on it briefly, just that, and we've been talking about it since this announcement was made, essentially how the chorus of calls from within the Democratic Party amplified, particularly over the last week and a half. You were one of those individuals, and we've interviewed you many times, and you've spoken about your affinity for Joe Biden, your respect for him, your friendship with him. You were one of the individuals who chose to publicly say, it's time to make a decision to step aside. Why did you decide to do that publicly? What was behind that decision?
So you're absolutely right. And it was a hard one, but I was on a number of calls with former ambassadors, donors, leaders in our community, business leaders, et cetera. And it was very interesting. 80 or 90% of the people on the calls were all very much of the belief that he should pass the torch. But even on those calls, they said, but we're not going to say anything publicly. And I was of the belief, well, how do you accomplish what needs to happen if everybody's quiet about it? I also personally felt that if I was criticizing Republicans who know Donald Trump to be the felon con that he is, and the person who was so involved in an insurrection in the United States, 2 impeachments, but that yet and privately they'd talk about how bad he was, but yet publicly they'd kiss the ring, as they would say. I did not want to be silent when I thought, for the benefit of our country, it was the right thing to do. And I really care about the president. He was vice president when he swore me in. And we traveled, as many Canadians know. He came to the Women's World Cup in Vancouver. And the Prime Minister Trudeau had a state dinner for him, even in Ottawa, after Donald Trump won in 2016. And I worked on the campaign in 2020. So I'm sure some people felt that I was not as loyal as I could have or should have been during that time, but I think it was the right thing to do for our country. And I always put my country first over party or person. And I think the move that the president made was the right one for our country.
So let me ask you, looking ahead, because essentially what many Democrats, as you describe it, had determined was that, and the reason many went public was that they would not be able to win, essentially, against Donald Trump in November with Joe Biden as the candidate. I know that you've talked about the sort of strength of the other people who could replace him, but the window to do all of that and then run against Donald Trump, who I can tell you, having just covered the RNC, certainly does have a base that is unified and motivated behind him. Like, how big of a challenge faces the Democrats in the coming weeks and the next few months as in the lead up to that election, in your view?
So I think the main reason the president did what he did today was the fact that the numbers are so challenging. And I think that there's a lot of concern within the leadership of the Democratic Party about how far behind the president was in all of what we call battleground states. Those are the states that could go Republican or Democrat, and they're the tipping point that caused Hillary to lose or Joe Biden to win the presidency. They're right at the margin. And all of those states were tipping very favorably for Donald Trump, and which was causing concern not only at the presidential level, but also at the congressional level, the senatorial level, what they call down ballot races. And so that's really what we're facing here. So.
And when you look at sort of how this all unfolded, and we touched, of course, on your own decision to go public versus have that conversation in the background, but just sort of like the greater context of the debate, followed by what happened just over a week ago, the attempted assassination on former President Donald Trump. You've been someone involved for most of your life in politics. If we could take just a moment and get your reflection on the past 3 weeks in American politics, have you ever witnessed anything like it?
No, it's the most stunning period of time, at least since my childhood, that when we were facing the Vietnam War and Watergate, all combined, with losing a vice president Agnew and then losing the president Nixon and resigning. It's not like that exactly. The 60s and early 70s were a real tumultuous time politically for our country, with assassinations and presidents not running and then other presidents resigning. I mean, it was much more challenging during that time. But here we are now, and where we are right this minute is jarring, because over the last several presidential terms, that's been pretty smooth in terms of elections and who the nominees are and where we're going. What's happened over the last few weeks, my jaw dropped when I saw the president and his debate, and I got a pit in my stomach that, was a real reality point that many of us have seen when we've had elder members of our family, age in front of our eyes, and we saw that with our president. My view is that the debate was an interview for the leader of the free world, and both men failed for different reasons. Joe Biden failed because he just couldn't respond and couldn't articulate a vision for the 4 years going forward. Donald Trump failed because of, just the number of lies and the approach that he wants to take with regard to women's rights and environment and migrants and immigration. I mean, we're facing a very dark period if Donald Trump wins. And I think the Democrats needed to make this change. And I applaud Joe Biden for doing it.
I know your time's limited. I have two quick questions for you. And the first is jumping off that last point. I found it interesting, like the RNC seemed to be, from a political perspective, successful for the Republicans until his speech, Donald Trump's speech, where it seemed to me, and I'm not nearly as much an insider or close to high profile Democrats as you are, but it seemed to be like the Democrats breathed a little bit of a sigh of relief listening to that speech. Like, maybe if we got our stuff together, this election isn't already a foregone conclusion. Do you think that's a fair statement based on the conversations you've had since?
I think so. So make no mistake about it. This race for president is very different from the races that Donald Trump has had previously. He actually has a fairly professional staff, and they are very effective here in this campaign. He has an ability to raise untold amounts of money, and now it far exceeds the Democratic raising, which was out to a fast start, but now is behind. And so, I think they had a lot of enthusiasm. I think the assassination attempt, which thank God he's okay, but the attempt really galvanized their party and energized their base. The greatest risk for the Republicans is actually the candidate. And whenever the candidate is given the opportunity to speak away from the teleprompter, it's at that moment that everybody realizes the craziness and remembers the craziness that we previously experienced. And so it's you've nailed it right on the head here. Donald Trump, in his very long, very long set of remarks, when he went off the teleprompter and went off, his remarks, he basically got himself in a lot of trouble. And so this is the campaign that we're going to see. And I think we're all going to see the real Donald Trump over the next few months. And I think that the candidate that we select, which will be one of the handful, maybe somebody else that you didn't put up on the screen, but maybe one of the handful that you put up, I think they're going to be very competitive. All these races are very tight in the US. And so Donald Trump lost by 45,000 votes to Joe Biden. He won by 77,000 votes. We all talk about, oh, Joe Biden had 7.5, 8 million more. We don't go by the popular vote. We go by the Electoral College. And I'm just tell everybody it's going to be a very tight race regardless. And I'm going to be very excited about the new generation Democrat that's going to come forward.
Just one quick final question, and for all of Canadians, all the Canadians watching right now, huge, understandably, that's what we're talking to the ambassador about, news south of the border. Joe Biden has decided to step aside as the Democrats' nominee for president. Ambassador, he's going to stay on, he says, to fulfill the rest of his term as president. Is that the right choice in your view?
Yes, absolutely. I have no doubt about his ability to be president, and I have no doubt that the team that he has around him, which are as good as any team that we've had in the White House in decades, I have all the confidence in the world that he will lead our country in a wonderful way in a complicated time, with Middle East tensions picking up even over the last 24 hours, with Ukraine on its heels. And then the U.S. coming in with additional aid, and let's see where that develops, and the threat to Ukraine in a new potential Trump administration, and then the complexity of everything else that a president has to deal with. I'm happy that he's going to be there at the helm, and I think he'll do a great job, and the team in place is superb.